welcome to Narayana IS Academy. I'm Yogesh Kottavar and I'll be taking up the daily news analysis of The Hindu and Indian Express. We'll discuss 5 most important articles from these two newspapers in a comprehensive manner. The first article mentioned on page number 10 of Indian Express. It talks about India's nuclear doctrine. We have observed that India's nuclear doctrine has completed 25 years. So we'll understand its relevance in the present times. The second article mentioned on page number 7 of The Hindu. It talks about income inequality. There is a rising trend of income inequality throughout the world and especially in the context of India too. So we'll understand what are the drivers of this income inequality and how Government of India can take some actions against it. The next article mentioned on page number 13 of Indian Express. It talks about dual use goods. Recently, US government has warned Indian companies from exporting dual use goods to the Russian government or Russia specifically. We are going to understand what are dual use goods and why American government is putting sanctions or warning to put sanctions against Indian companies. The next article mentioned on page number 6 of The Hindu. It talks about Karnataka governor's action. Recently, the governor of Karnataka has approved a sanction that a prosecution can be taken ahead against the Chief Minister of Karnataka. So we are going to understand the constitutional question of whether governor can take such action against the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. The last article mentioned on page number 6 of The Hindu. It talks about the investments in Bangladesh. We have observed that Indian companies had already invested in Bangladesh since many years, and the recent political crisis in Bangladesh has provided some challenges to Indian companies. So we'll understand the legal protection related to it in a detailed manner. After which we'll also discuss some practice questions so that you will have a good idea about what kind of questions can be expected in the examination. So let's get started. The first article is about India's nuclear doctrine, which was brought in 25 years back and it still remains relevant. So we'll study this nuclear doctrine in detail. This is important from GS paper 2, which talks about India and its neighborhood, and nuclear policy is very important when it comes to our defense and technology. Now look at this previous year question. It says, in what ways would the ongoing US-Iran nuclear pact controversy affect the national interest of India? How should India respond to its situation? 15 marks. So you can expect such questions in the examination. Now we are saying 25 years back we brought a policy, a nuclear doctrine. But what has actually happened? See, India conducted 2 different nuclear tests. One test was conducted in the year 1974 at the time of Indira Gandhi, and second test was conducted in the year 1998 at the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Now many students get confused with these 2 developments. They are not sure when India exactly became a nuclear weapon state. See, in the year 1974, when we conducted the Pokhran 1 test, at that time we displayed our capability of using nuclear technology, but that was only for some peaceful purpose. See, nuclear technology can be used for civilian purpose, that is to generate electricity and all, and also for military purpose, for developing weapons, nuclear weapons. And in the 1974, we only talked about this civilian purpose. We did not develop any nuclear weapon as such. But in the year 1998, India has gone for Pokhran 2 test, and in this test we demonstrated the world that we have the capability to build military weapons or nuclear weapons. So the second test is very important, after which India officially became part of the nuclear weapon states. Now, India is considered to be one of these 9 countries who have the nuclear capability, because if you see in the entire world, only these countries have nuclear weapons. This includes the 5 permanent members of United Nations Security Council, that is USA, UK, France, Russia, China, and 4 other countries, which includes India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. So we can say that we are part of an elite group. Okay. Moving ahead, what is a nuclear doctrine which India brought after this Pokhran 2 test? Nuclear doctrine is a policy framework. It's a document wherein you are mentioning the strategy of India related to the use of nuclear weapon. That means you're telling the world that we have nuclear weapon and exactly when are we going to use it. So it will tell about the deterrence, conditions of use and overall defense posture. Now talking specifically about India's nuclear doctrine. The first term that we read over here is the deterrence. We say that the core objective of India's nuclear doctrine is to bring deterrence against our enemies. Now what is deterrence? To deter someone means to create some fear in the minds of our enemy. Fear, or we can say a doubt, wherein the enemy will think twice before attacking India. So here we are saying that we want to bring this deterrence, and this deterrence can be brought in three different ways, or three things are required to bring this deterrence. One is you should have the capability. You should have the nuclear weapon capability. You should have enough technology to build nuclear weapons and the ability to go for an attack on other country. And that enemy country should be convinced that you have that capability. So through this Pokhran 2 test, we have shown our capability to our enemies. Second, it should be credible also. That means even if you have weapons, nuclear weapons, but you are not using it in the war. See, for example, the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia has nuclear weapons, but Russia has not used these weapons. So there is a chance that your enemies may think that India will never use these weapons. So we will have to create the credibility. We will need to convince the people of our enemy country that we may use this nuclear weapon if required. And that comes from a policy document, that is this nuclear doctrine. And this has to be communicated, the clear communication, wherein we are saying that if you cross these red lines, in that case, we are going to attack you through our nuclear weapons. So this is the clear-cut agenda of a nuclear doctrine. Now, if you look at the India's nuclear doctrine, it mentions about credible minimum deterrence. So we are bringing deterrence, we are going to bring it in a credible manner, but we are bringing only minimum deterrence. What do you mean? What do we mean by minimum? We are saying that we are not an aggressive country. We are a country who will use it only for our defense. So even if we have the nuclear technology, we are not building nuclear weapons in a excessive form. For example, earlier we had 10, then 100, then 1000, then 1 lakh. We are not building in this manner. We are saying that we will only have minimum amount of weapons which are necessary for our defense. Then second, we will have a no first use policy. That means we are not going to use the nuclear weapon as the first person. So in case someone attacks us with nuclear weapon, only in that case we will use our nuclear weapons. Otherwise we are not going to use it. We'll only go for the normal conventional war. But you see, if you want to go for this no first use policy, you must have second strike capability. What does this mean? That means the first strike is done by other country. For example, China attacked India. That was the first strike. So in case China made the strike in such a way that your entire India has been destroyed, or all your nuclear sites are destroyed by China in its first strike itself. So in that case, we'll say India does not have any second strike capability. We cannot even retaliate. So this no first use policy will go against our national interest or our defense. So we are saying we will first have the second strike capability. Now how we'll build that? We will build a nuclear triad. Nuclear triad. What does this mean? We are building the capability to send our nuclear weapons from air, from land and from water. So you will have submarines, you will have some airplanes and you will have some missile system available at land that can use nuclear weapons. So in case someone attacked your land, you can use the air or water or any other route to attack that particular country through the second strike. Then we said that we are going for massive retaliation. In case any country attacks India with nuclear weapon, then India will go for the second strike, and that will be a very massive retaliation. That means we'll not use 1 or 2 weapons. We will go for a massive retaliation wherein we will inflict unacceptable damage. So in simple terms, we are saying we are going to destroy you completely. Then we have a civilian control. See, Whether we will use our nuclear weapon or not, it is not decided by our military, rather it is decided by our prime minister or the civilian authority. So we have this nuclear command authority. It has two wings. One is political council, another is executive council. And this political council is headed by the prime minister. So unless prime minister orders, you cannot use this nuclear weapon even in the war. Then we are showing our commitment to the non-use against non-nuclear states. India in its policy doctrine said that if there is a country with whom we are at war and that country do not have nuclear weapons, for example Bangladesh, if we go for war with Bangladesh, in that case India says that we will not use nuclear weapon against you. And then we also said that in case of a response to the weapons of mass destruction, then also we can use nuclear weapon. That means, see, nuclear weapon is one part of the weapon of mass destruction. There are other weapons too which can bring destruction on mass scale. For example, there is biological weapon, then there is chemical weapon, and obviously the nuclear weapon. India has said that even if you go for any biological or chemical weapon against us, in that case also we can use our nuclear weapon. Moving ahead, India has also mentioned for its support to the global disarmament. India feels that we should go for disarmament. Disarmament means we should not, any country in the world should not have nuclear weapons as such, and we should remove that from the entire earth. But that should be done in a good manner. That should not come through this nuclear non-proliferation treaty. Rather, India supports a non-discriminatory treaty in which everyone goes for such action. So this is the entire doctrine of India's nuclear policy. Now here there are some arguments which support our no first use and some arguments which are against it. Those who support this say that it is a very good policy. Why? Because India says that we want to become Vishwaguru. That is, we want to go for global leadership, and the leader should show some ethics, some moral high ground, and no first use shows that moral high ground in the international arena. Second, it can reduce the arms race. See, arms race means if India buys some particular helicopters, then same helicopters are ordered by Pakistan. So that is a kind of race going on, which we call as arms race. We are saying that in terms of nuclear weapons also, there is an arms race going on. So we want that race to be reduced. So no first use policy, if every country goes for it, then there will not be any arms race as such. Then moving ahead, we can have some strategic stability. See, if India does not have no first use policy, then China will also not have this kind of policy. That means there will not be any kind of predictability in the international affairs. So China will think that India may attack anytime. India may think China may attack anytime. So this kind of unpredictability will stay. Those who are against this particular policy, they say that there are credibility issues already. You say that you're going to use it, but China may think that you may not use it. Just like Russia-Ukraine war, Russia is not using. So similarly, there will be credibility issues. Second, there are strategic disadvantage. For example, if there is a war going on with Pakistan or China, a conventional war, which is going on for years, you cannot use your nuclear weapons even if you have them. In the World War II, America used these weapons to end the war, but India cannot use it just because of our policy. Then, regional security concern. See, sometimes if you use nuclear weapons, that goes against your own interest. For example, the radiation of that nuclear weapon will be there in your region also. So there is a chance that you might not prefer to go for this weapon. So in the conclusion, we can say that this nuclear doctrine is a very comprehensive strategy framework, and it is very much relevant even in the present times, and it has to be seen in addressing the complex security challenges that exist at this moment. The next article is about income inequality. In recent times, we have observed that income inequality has grown in India as well as throughout the world. So we are going to study this income inequality in detail, how it is coming into picture. This is important from syllabus perspective, GS paper 2, which talks about issues relating to development and management of social sectors, which includes health, education, human resources, etc. Now look at this previous year question of 2020. It says COVID-19 pandemic accelerated class inequalities and poverty in India. Comment. So such question can be asked in terms of inequality also, and that too in the context of present times or globalization. Okay, so let's move forward. We said that the income inequality is one of the most pressing socio-economic issue of this time, as it is increasing in India as well as other part of the world. Now the term income inequality, what does this mean? This means that the income or wealth is distributed in an uneven manner. For example, if there are 10 people living in an area and the entire wealth has been distributed in such a manner that this one person is having 90% of the wealth and rest of these 9 people have only 10% of the wealth. This wealth could be the assets, properties, or the income that is being generated with time. So here we are saying this distribution is completely uneven, and this is called income inequality. The amount or these assets, everything gets concentrated in the hands of few people in that area. Now this is happening in India, and why this has come into picture, what are the drivers, what brings this kind of income inequality? Number one is the economic policy of the country and this phenomena of globalization. You look at this phenomena which started after 1990s, especially after the LPG reform. We see that after LPG reforms, we have liberalized Indian economy. We allowed Indian economy to get integrated with the world economy. After which, what happened is that new opportunities were created for wealth generation, which is a good thing. But the bad thing is that these opportunities were provided to those who already had some kind of capital or skills with them. So those people who were lacking such skills or lacking some kind of capital, they were left behind the large segment which generated wealth. So we are saying this LPG reform, this has led to wealth generation. That means our GDP has increased. But this has not helped everyone. Rather, this has helped only those individuals who had some capital or skills, and rest of the population has been left behind. Then the second argument or the second driver of income inequality is the technological advancement. Now you may say technology is a good thing. Technological advancement brings productivity and economic growth. But there is another angle to it. That is, only the high skilled workers are favored with new technologies. For example, if you look at artificial intelligence, only those engineers who are highly skilled in the artificial intelligence, they will become part of this new sector. But the other workers who are semi-skilled or low-skilled or unskilled, they cannot get any kind of job due to this artificial intelligence. Rather, many of the people are going to get removed from their job. So that means we are saying even this technological advancement, it favors some people and not everyone. Then moving ahead, the third driver is the regulatory environment in the country. Now, if you look at India, sometimes India is considered as a soft state. Why soft state? Because we cannot regulate in the rightful manner. Even if we have laws, those laws are not implemented in letter and spirit. So here we are saying that whenever there is weak regulation, what will happen? People who will have more amount of money or wealth, they will give bribe and solve their issues. Whereas people who do not have such amount of money, they will struggle. So this weak regulation, it further exacerbates this issue of income inequality. Okay. Then the last in this list is the corruption. Now corruption is very important. Corruption is considered to be both driver as well as consequence of this income inequality. What does this mean? See, if there is corruption in India or any other part of the world, then that means it will lead to income inequality. How? Person having money will try to influence government. The person having some kind of wealth will try to ensure that the infrastructure project which government is building comes to him. So here he will try to give the bribe, after which he will get the project and after which he will earn the money. That means the rich will become richer and the poor will remain as it is or become more poor. So here corruption will lead to income inequality. Now after this income inequality further leads to corruption. How? If you are poor and there is another person who is rich, then there is already a gap in the society. And here again this rich person, because of the economic heft, he will also have some kind of political heft. It is said that in India, the government is formed or the elections are won with the notes, with the votes of poor people and the notes of rich people. So here notes means the funding that comes to the political parties from these rich people. So here we are saying that this corruption becomes core part of a country where income inequality exists. Okay. Now moving further, what are the consequences of this income inequality? Number one, the society will be stratified. There will be stratification. Strata means there will be different classes. So one will be rich class or the ultra rich class, one will be poor or ultra poor class, and this will intensify. Now this is not a good thing, because such stratification leads to social tensions, because if there will be people who are very poor and there will be people who are very rich, then you will see separate realities of two different stratas. If you go to Dharavi in Mumbai, there is a railway track. In the right side of that there is Dharavi, and in the left side there is Sion area, and you will see the differences, that people in Dharavi who are living in the slum area and people in the Sion who are living in a cosmopolitan or the high quality, high class lifestyle. Okay. Then second is the reduced economic mobility. Mobility means the opportunity to move forward. Herein, if you are, let's say you are part of the society and you are here at the societal level where you are earning only 10,000 per month, but you want to go ahead, you want to earn 50,000, you want to earn 1 lakh. Now this is economic mobility. But the problem is, if there is income inequality in the society, those people who are at the lowest stage, they will not have much access to resources, due to which they will not be in a position to move forward in life. And those who are already having some kind of capital, they can put that capital and earn money from it. So they will just move ahead. Third is the impact on democracy. We say we are living in a democracy where the power lies with the people. But here, those who are at the upper level, they will always try to influence this political power. So we have heard about the crony capitalism, or the capitalism leading to the political power. So this leads to some kind of political instability, because the person who is in power, he makes policies in favor of these capitalists and not the people in general. And this leads to lack of trust in the public offices or the public trust in the institutions. Then there is issue of this public health and education also. If there will be maximum population which is having resources lesser in amount, then these people cannot spend their money on the healthcare, on the education, and one who cannot invest on health and education, you cannot expect that person to grow financially or in economic terms. Now, if you look at the current trends in India, what is the trend of income inequality in India at this moment? So this World Inequality Lab, they said that top 1% of Indian population holds more than 40% of the total wealth. And this is a very different phenomena since 1980, because in 1980, this 1% used to hold only 12.5% and now it is 40%. That means income inequality is growing in a very intense manner since this 1990s reforms. Moving ahead, what are the possible solutions? The first solution could be progressive taxation. The taxation should be in such a manner that the poorest of the poor should have the lowest tax and the richest of the rich should have the highest tax slab, which is already the case in India. Second, you can improve the access to education and healthcare. You can provide universal access to education and healthcare to everyone. Then strengthening anti-corruption measure. We said that corruption is the major angle. So we can take some anti-corruption measure in terms of strengthening the laws and bringing some vigilance. The fourth will be social welfare programs. Some programs such as you can provide food assistance to people, you can provide some unemployment benefits. So such subsidies, such schemes are required. At last, we can say that this income inequality is a very big and a complex issue which needs attention of the government. And we are presently talking about inclusive governance, which is trying to actually reduce this income inequality. The next article is related to dual-use goods. Recently, United States of America has warned Indian companies who are exporting some dual-use goods to Russia. They are saying that we will put sanctions on these companies. Now, here we need to understand what are dual-use goods and the India-US, India-Russia relationship. From syllabus perspective, it can be asked in prelims as well as mains. Mains GS paper 2 talks about groupings and agreements affecting India's interest, and GS paper 3 talks about science and tech, and this dual use goods, this is part of science and technology. Now moving ahead, look at this previous year question. It says, recently USA decided to support India's membership in multilateral export control regimes called Australia Group and Wassenaar Arrangement. What is the difference between them? First, Australia Group is an informal arrangement which aims to allow exporting countries to minimize the risk of assisting chemical and biological weapon proliferation, whereas the Wassenaar Arrangement is a formal group under the OECD holding identical objectives. Second, Australia Group comprises predominantly of Asian, African and North American countries, whereas the member countries of Wassenaar Arrangement are predominantly from the European Union and American continent. So such questions can be asked in the exam. Now moving ahead with the context. We are saying that US government officials are putting pressure on Indian companies, and this is not a new case because earlier in 2023 November, USA had put sanctions on an Indian company, a Bangalore-based SI2 Microsystems, this company. It was being said that this company is selling some dual-use technology to Russia. Now, first of all, what do you mean by dual-use good or dual-use technology? We'll take example of nuclear technology. For example, you brought uranium. Now, using this uranium, using the nuclear technology, what we can do? One we can do is we can use it for a civilian purpose. For example, you can generate electricity. Generating electricity is a good thing, and we are using this uranium for the same cause. So we are doing a civilian thing. But there is another application of the same product, that is its military use, wherein we can use the same uranium to build nuclear weapons, and this can be used as a military weapon against any other country. And this is not considered a good thing. So we are saying there is one good which is having application in two forms. One is civilian, one is military application. Such goods or such technology are considered as dual-use goods or dual-use technologies. Now, if we want to take example of dual-use goods, this includes many things. Just like nuclear, we have some electronic components like some of the chips or semiconductors. These semiconductors will be used in our computers, laptops also, and these can be used in the satellites also, and these can be used in missiles also. Then there are many drones and softwares. See, drones, nowadays drones are very normal. They are used in many functions. For example, for wedding shoot, drones are used. Now this is a civilian purpose. But the same drones can be used to send terrorists. Same drones can be used to send some kind of nuclear material. And then it becomes a dual-use good. There can be many chemicals also. There can be some machine tools which are manufactured. And these are called dual-use goods. Now, for curbing the proliferation of dual-use goods, there are some mechanisms. What do I mean by proliferation? That such goods should not increase. And for that, we have Wassenaar Arrangement, Missile Technology Control Regime, that is MTCR. Such arrangements are already made so that such dual-use goods and technologies are regulated by the world. Now moving ahead, if you look at United States of America or its Western allies, since the Russia-Ukraine war has started, they have started putting sanctions on many governments, especially those who are supporting Russia. Now in this case, they have already put some of these items in the list of sanction, which includes drones, softwares, machine tools, etc., which are dual use goods. And now they are saying that if you export such things to Russia, in that case, we will put sanction on you. If we put sanction, that means you will lose the access to United States financial system, which will not be good for any company in India. So that is the case. The next article is about corruption charges against the sitting Chief Minister of Karnataka, that is Siddaramaiah. Now this article is important for us to understand the powers of governor, because the role of governor in this matter is very important. And it is important from syllabus perspective because GS paper 2 talks about appointment to various constitutional posts, governor being one of the constitutional posts. Now moving ahead, look at this previous year question. It says, no criminal proceedings shall be instituted against the governor of a state, any court, in any court, during his term of office. Second, the emoluments and allowances of the governor of a state shall not be diminished during his term of office. So it's a factual question which is very much static, we can say, we can expect in exam also. Now moving ahead, look at the issue, what has happened exactly. Now the issue is related to a scam related to the land acquisition issue. Now if you go to any state in India, they will go for land acquisition. Let's say, for example, a government wants to build a metro project on a particular area. But in that particular area, there is a land which is owned by a private person. Let's say, for example, I own a land. In that case, what government will do? Government will take up that land, and instead of that land, government will provide me some kind of compensation. Now this compensation will be of two types. First, they will provide me some amount of money, that is the monetary compensation. And secondly, they will provide me some alternate land where I can be relocated, where I will resettle. Now this is the normal process which takes place in any state in India. And this was taking place in Karnataka also. But here a scam is being alleged, wherein it is being said that some of this alternate land is provided to the wife of Chief Minister Siddaramaiah. Now these are allegations. The case has not yet been proved. But when you want to go ahead with any kind of corruption case, in that case, you first need to take some kind of approval from the authorities. Now this has been mentioned in the Prevention of Corruption Act, Section 17A. It clearly says that if you want to go ahead with a complaint of corruption against a public servant, then in that case, whoever will be the in charge authority over that public servant, you will have to go and get his approval first. For example, if there is an IS officer, then you may need the authority of the secretary of the department, or even the governor of the state. Now here in this case, the charges are directly against the chief minister. So obviously that private complainant went to governor, and recently governor of Karnataka directly approved the prosecution of chief minister. Now the question is, can governor go for such action without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers? Because constitutionally we have heard this thing many a times that governor has to act with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. And here the Council of Ministers had not suggested, rather they were arguing against this particular act of governor. So now this matter has went to court. Now there is one political angle to this issue. If you look at the Karnataka as a state, right now the party which is ruling Karnataka is Congress, whereas in center we have BJP. So there is a party politics going on between these two parties, which is also leading to such tensions in terms of constitutional or legal frameworks. Now, what is the judicial precedent related to this particular matter? Judiciary in earlier cases has given some judgments which say that governor has some kind of discretionary power too. Now this discretionary power means governor can sometimes even go against the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, and this can be done only in some cases. In which cases? Wherein the Council of Ministers advice may be biased or incomplete, and this has to be used judiciously. That means there is a loophole, or there is a constitutional mandate to the governor wherein it can go against even that advice. But here we are observing a corruption case, and if you want a credible investigation to take place, the case to be resolved in a rightful manner, the role of courts become very important. Now, look at the powers of governor. The first power it has is the executive power. As an executive head, see, if you look at the government of any state, it is headed by the governor, and all the council of ministers are going to advise governor. Then governor will have this discretionary power. Discretion means the person can use his or her brain, use his or her reasoning and decide on the matters. So whenever you want to reserve any bill for the president's consideration, then governor can use this discretionary power. In case governor wants that there should be president rule applied in the state, then he can do on its own. And governor can take decisions without council of ministers advice when the advice is completely questionable, and this is the recent case of Karnataka. Now, there are some other powers of governor too, such as some legislative powers. If you look at the legislative assembly of any state, it is also headed by the governor again, wherein governor can summon, prorogue and dissolve this assembly. And even there will be address of the state legislature by governor yearly. So the first address will be given by governor. Then there are some judicial powers. Just like president, governor also has some judicial powers, such as governor can pardon, reprieve, respite or remit a person. Then there are some powers to sanction prosecution. Now, as I said, if you want to go for a complaint against any public official, for example, you want to go for a complaint against an IS officer or an MLA or even chief minister, in that case, you need this authority of governor's approval. So his approval is required. And here we are saying this is an exceptional case which we need to understand. So we'll wait for the judgment of Supreme Court. The next article is about the private investments in Bangladesh. We have observed that recently the political crisis in Bangladesh has led to multiple challenges for Bangladeshis as well as Indians. And there are many Indian companies who have already privately invested in the Bangladesh. So the FDI coming to Bangladesh has a major section coming from India. Now these Indian companies are very much concerned because of the political instability in the region. So we'll understand this issue in detail. India-Bangladesh relations are very important, and we'll read this bilateral investment treaties also. Now, before moving forward, look at this previous year question. It says, consider the following statements. The value of Indo-Sri Lanka trade has consistently increased in the last decade. Textile and textile articles constitute an important item of trade between India and Bangladesh. In the last 5 years, Nepal has been the largest trading partner of India in South Asia. Now, if you look at this question, you will understand that you can expect such factual questions from the current affairs part of international relations. Now, moving ahead, what is the context? We said that Indian companies who had already invested in Bangladesh, now they are concerned because of the resignation and flying away of Sheikh Hasina. Now, the role of Sheikh Hasina is very important, because when Sheikh Hasina was in power, India-Bangladesh relations were moving in the right direction. Now, if you look at Indian companies who had invested in Bangladesh, their investment was in various sectors such as edible oil, power, infrastructure, fast-moving consumer goods, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, etc. Now, here, when Sheikh Hasina government was in power, she even provided for the special economic zone, which provided more FDI in the Bangladesh, and this FDI was coming majorly from India. Now, as the political crisis has turned completely against Sheikh Hasina, and we have observed that a campaign was run against Sheikh Hasina regime and against India. The campaign was named as India Out Boycott Movement. This was led by the opposition parties. And now the same opposition parties can be in power, which means the investments that were made from Indian side, these are now at a crisis position. There is a chance that whatever laws already exist in Bangladesh, they may be twisted or changed and brought against Indian investments. Now moving ahead, there are some legal measures already taken for the investments throughout the world, and this in case of India can be seen in three different parts. Number one is a domestic law in the host country. Now if you see the Bangladesh will have already a law passed by the Bangladeshi parliament which allows for more FDI, and such laws provide for the protection of investors. So if there is any investment coming from any other country, that will be protected by the laws of Bangladesh. Such laws already exist, but there is a chance that these laws can be changed by the new regime that will come into power. The second is the contractual agreement. Now, sometimes we see that a company from India goes for an agreement with a company in Bangladesh, or sometimes a company from India goes for an agreement directly with the government of Bangladesh. Such agreements are termed as contractual agreements, and these agreements will also have some obligations, some provisions which ensure the protection of these investors. Now again, because the regime will be changed, again there is a chance that these agreements can be removed or can be cancelled down. Moving ahead, there is third thing called the international law. Now if you have heard about this thing called BIT, that is Bilateral Investment Treaties. Now this is an international law which talks about the protection of investors throughout the world. Now here what happens is that a treaty is taken place between two different governments. So for example, here government of India will have an agreement with government of Bangladesh, and this particular agreement will provide some kind of protection to the investments, whether the investment will be from India to Bangladesh or Bangladesh to India. Now here we see that in case of India, such agreement was signed in the year 2009. Again, Sheikh Hasina was in power at that point of time. Now moving ahead, in this case, if we are concerned about Indian companies and their investments, there can be some way forward or a solution. First, we need to go for a diplomatic engagement with the new regime of Bangladesh. Whoever comes to power, we will have to have some kind of communication with them. Secondly, we have to review the legal arrangements. Any contracts which were done at the time of Sheikh Hasina, maybe the government of this time want to review it, and India should also support this review mechanism. Third, we will have to utilize this ISDS mechanism. This ISDS mechanism provides for dispute resolution. Whenever there is a dispute in case of investment throughout the world, this ISDS mechanism provides for resolution of that dispute through the same agreement which we talked earlier, that is Bilateral Investment Treaty. Then we can diversify our investments. We need to go for different sectors or different regions or different countries for investing, so that we will have a diversified portfolio. Then we can look for some local partnership. We can collaborate with some local partners in Bangladesh for our economic friendship or any kind of investments. Then we need to monitor the developments that are going on in Bangladesh. We do not know what will happen, whether the opposition party will come to power, whether military will take over, or Sheikh Hasina will go back. We do not know. So we will have to keenly observe all of these developments. And then at last, we will have to promote our bilateral cooperation with Bangladesh and bring in investment-friendly environment which will be beneficial for both countries. So now it's time for some practice questions. Question number 1. Consider the following statements regarding the powers of governor. First, governor can independently dissolve the state legislative assembly without consulting chief minister or the council of ministers. Now this is an extreme and constitutionally incorrect statement, because constitution says that governor has to act with the aid and advice of council of ministers. So this is wrong. Second, governor's decision to sanction the prosecution of any MLA or chief minister cannot be challenged in a court of law. Now this is an extreme statement. There is almost nothing that we can say that we cannot challenge in the court of law. So this is wrong. So option D is the right answer. Question number 2. Consider the following statements about the factors contributing to income inequality. First, economic liberalization has led to wealth generation primarily in sectors that disproportionately benefit those with existing capital and skills. This is absolutely correct. This we have discussed already. Second, technological advancements have narrowed the income gap by providing equal opportunities to low-skilled and high-skilled workers alike. Now, this is a wrong statement. Rather, this gap has increased. And third, corruption exacerbates income inequality by allowing the wealthy to influence public policies to their advantage. That is absolutely correct. Fourth, progressive tax policies are a significant driver of income inequality. Now, this is a very good statement. You can see it is saying it is a driver of income inequality. It is not driver. It is a measure that we take because there exists some income inequality. So, fourth statement is wrong. So, only one is right, three is right. That means A first is the answer, A. Question number three. Which of the following items are considered dual-use goods that can have both civilian and military applications? First, electronic components, machine tools, commercial drones and associated software, chemicals used in pharmaceuticals. See, all of these can be used for both civilian and military purpose. So, answer will be D, all of the above. Then consider the following statements. India is the second biggest trade partner of Bangladesh in Asia after China. Now, this is a complete fact. This is true. Second, according to Union Budget 2024-25, Bangladesh is the top recipient of Indian government aid to foreign countries. Now, this is also a factual statement taken from another current affairs. So, this is actually wrong. The answer actually is Bhutan and not Bangladesh. So, second statement is wrong. We can say A is the right answer. Question number 5. Which of the following international agreements aim to control the export of dual-use goods to prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and advanced military technology? Wassenaar Arrangement, Missile Technology Control Regime, Kyoto Protocol. So you see this Kyoto Protocol, it is related to climate change. It has nothing to do with this dual-use goods. But Wassenaar and MTCR are right. So answer will be A, 1 and 2. Next is the mains practice question. The question says, evaluate the relevance of India's nuclear doctrine today, focusing on its key principles, deterrence, no first use, policy and second strike capability. Discuss the strengths and potential challenges of maintaining this doctrine in the context of evolving regional and global security dynamics. Now, it's a very comprehensive kind of question and the answer should also be very much comprehensive. First, you start with India's nuclear doctrine. Now, you can start from 1998 Pokhran test or the particular policy doctrine which started with weaponization of India's nuclear sector. After which you can move on to the body part in which the question which asked about key principles. So discuss these key principles first. The deterrence, no first use and second strike capability. In brief, you need to discuss them. And after which you will move ahead with the current relevance because relevance is the major part the examiner will be interested in. So you need to show that the global context requires us to go for this doctrine. There is this regional dynamics which involves Chinese angle, American angle, Pakistani angle, all that you can mention over here. Then talk about the strength as well as challenges. In the strength, you can say that it has a moral uprightness to have a no first use policy. You can talk about the deterrence, the strategic stability, all these angles. And then talk about the challenges which we anyway face in terms of regional security or technological threats. So this is how you can comprehensively discuss it. Eventually, give a conclusion wherein you talk about the relevance of this doctrine in present times. And you can also say that we can go for some periodic reviews because reviewing something is a good thing. Nothing wrong in that. This you can say. Now, I hope you like this video. After this, if you want any more updates, please like, share and subscribe to the YouTube channel of Narayana IAS Academy and stay updated. Thank you.